Rattlesnake Flats,
I came to marry
Arizona Territory,
I'm
the
old
3rd
Larry
of
at
May,
an older hinge.
1892.
You
He
deserve a
saved her
gate
from
that
the
doesn't
flood 20
squeal.
years ago. Now she's come back to marry the man who forgot he was still alive. The wind cut like iron filings. It came off the mesas with a rasp, hissing through wire the way a file bites a horseshoe. I was checking fence. Same as most morning step, test, staple, tug work you do when there's no one left to talk you out of it. The land was all bone and glare, greasewood trembling like a fever. Something sat on the horizon that didn't belong to the land. Not a dust devil, not a pronghorn flicker. It moved with purpose, a darker stitch on a sun-bleached shirt. I laid a palm on the top wire, felt it sing with the wind and shaded my eyes. The shape resolved slow as a memory you don't trust. Horse first, then rider, then a blue bead at a throat catching noonlight. The world narrowed to sound the tick of my breath, the faint creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves against crust, the smell of juniper shadow, the taste of iron in the air. I stopped working. The wire hummed. Even the magpies went quiet. A man learns to read silence out here. Some silences ask a question. Mine asked, "What kind of man are you, Cole?" The answer changes a life. She reined in at the gate like she'd always known the measure of this place. Dark hair braided, skirt the color of a summer storm over the Mogollon rim, boots scuffed honest, shoulders set easy strong without making a poem of it. She touched 2 fingers to her chest in greeting, not quite a wave. I had the foolish thought that the land had been holding its breath for her. "Morning," I said. The word felt like a door unused. "You lost?" "No." Her voice had that riverbed calm you only hear after a flood has taken what it will. I came on purpose. There are men who talk a storm up. I am not that man. I set my pliers down, because the hands need something to do when the heart stirs. Up close I noticed the beadwork red, black, and sky, Apache craft if I had to bet a month's beef. She looked me straight and kind, not soft. "You don't remember me," she said. "Can't say I do. Painted Creek," she said. "The night water took the cottonwoods. You wrapped a child in your coat and told her to stay brave." She drew breath. "I am Elan Tenaya. There are sounds you carry under the ribs for 20 winters and still know at once. Thunder on hardpan, a rope going tight, a child coughing river water onto your sleeve. That night came back whole, the roar, the cold bite, the way the current swung like a mean horse. I remember the little weight against me, the teeth chatter. I remember saying something I hoped was true. Elan smiled, not for my sake, but for truth catching up. "You saved me," she said. "I saved the words." I nodded because anything else would be theater. "You made it." "I did," she said. "And I've come to stay." The wind leaned in again. Somewhere far off a steer bawled. I opened the gate, and the day walked through a different man. There was a time I believed the land could be a wife patient, unforgiving, a keeper of accounts. I believed a man could spend what he had on work, and the wind would pay him back in quiet. But quiet is not peace. Quiet is a room where your ghosts practice their words, and come morning they'll ride with you unless someone else takes the reins. I didn't expect it to be her. I didn't expect the past to arrive with a blue bead catching sun, asking me to be the man I once promised a child I could be again. Inside the house I poured coffee, the honest kind that tastes of tin and smoke. She stood by Clara's old photograph and didn't stare. "Respect is a kind of prayer. You've lived long with silence," she said. "Silence earned," I answered. "Not sure it's spent wise." She told me of winters that chewed bone, of summers that blistered water out of stone, of a grandmother who taught leaves and roots the way a preacher works a psalm. She didn't ask for my past. She let it come on its own legs. When it did, I didn't dress it pretty. "I came to marry you," she said, as if saying she'd come to stand where the light was good. I laughed the way a man does when fear finds a joke. "I'm old Lariat, an older hinge. You deserve a gate that doesn't squeal." "I'm choosing the squeal," she said. I took my hat off to that because a man takes his hat off to courage, even when it's aimed at his own door. Outside, dusk gathered like smoke from an unseen fire. Coyotes began their hymn, and her horse stamped. restless, as if it too sensed the turn of something larger than weather. I looked at Elan, this woman who'd once been a child in my arms, and now stood taller than the ache of all those lost years, and the air between us felt charged, like stormlight before rain. She reached out, brushed a bit of rust dust from my sleeve, simple as kindness. The touch lit every wire in me from heart to hand. You fixed fences, she said. Maybe it's time you fixed what they kept out. The night answered with a low thunder rolling off the mesas. Somewhere in it, I thought I heard the river again, not angry now, just calling a man home. Mesquite Crossing wears its judgment like a church hat tilted just enough to see better. Word traveled faster than rain. Merritt's got an Apache woman up at the flats, the feed store fella said, chewing the same sentence all afternoon. Barton Hale big spread, small soul let it sour into talk on the saloon porch. By sundown, the whole town wore the news like dust. Not heavy, just everywhere. Mesquite was a place where gossip worked harder than men. The church bell rang twice on Sundays, once for worship and once to remind sinners who they were. Women hid behind hymnals, men behind whiskey glasses. The air itself seemed to eavesdrop. Elan didn't bend under eyes. She moved through town with a healer's hands and a rider's seat, the kind that knew both pain and grace. Children followed her shadow out of curiosity. Old men pretended not to watch, and did anyway. She got 3 kids through a fever week with willow bark and cool cloths, and those mothers decided they could nod to her without losing heaven. Progress comes to the frontier the same way a creek rises inch, then foot. Hale didn't like inches. He liked lines. Straight, sharp, and his. He'd drawn them across land deeds, water rights, and the spines of men who worked for him. He drew them in conversation, too, between what was his kind of folk and what wasn't. "You shaming your dead wife, Merritt," he told me one noon, leaning on the hitch rail like it owed him respect. His voice was casual, the way a man oils a gun before he aims it, and confusing property with charity. I measured him from boots to hatband. "You got business with my herd, say it. If you got business with my house, you'll find me home." He grinned the way coyotes do when they think they've made you run. "Just neighborly advice," he said, but the word neighbor rolled off him like a lie that had forgotten its manners. That evening, Elan stitched by the window. The lamplight touched her fingers, steady as breath. "Men like Hale confuse themselves with fences," she said. "They forget grass grows whether they approve." I didn't answer. Pride is hot iron, you don't grab it barehanded. But I saw truth in her calm, the same quiet force that had outlasted drought and war. She wasn't made of the kind of fragility these men mistook for sin. Days found us rhythm. She rose before dawn, fed the chickens, checked the horses. She could tell a mare's mood by its ear flick, and she hummed songs that bent the air softer. The mean roan that had green broke 2 boys let her rub a scab without a pin. It wasn't witchcraft, it was respect. She gave it, and the land gave back. At night, we traded stories like salt. Me about sandstorms and chuckwagon coffee, her about coyote songs and how juniper smoke keeps dark dreams at the tent flap. She told of her grandmother who'd buried 2 husbands and still laughed like rain on tin. I told her about Clara, my late wife, how she smelled of lilac soap and always said the wind was God's handwriting. Elan listened without judgment, which is rarer than gold. Nothing fancy passed between us. Just enough. But enough has weight. The talk carved its way through the town like water through soft stone. Not at her, at me. They called me the fool who forgot his kind. I'd been called worse by men who mattered more, yet this cut differently. Maybe because I saw in their scorn a reflection of my own cowardice, years spent hiding behind routine, behind the fence lines I'd built around grief. One hard noon I said, "You should go." The words came like a bad tooth pulled wrong. Not for shame, for peace. She tied her thread, cut it clean. "Peace comes where truth lives," she said. "Does your truth live here with me, Cole?" Her eyes didn't accuse. They invited. That's harder to bear. I couldn't answer honest without tearing something, so I didn't. She saddled up at first light. I stood in the doorway, coffee cooling in my hand. The sun made her braid look like a river of ink. I wanted to call out, but pride held the reins tighter than sense. She turned once, halfway down the road, not to wave, just to see if I'd earned the right to stop her. I hadn't. Dust lifted and settled behind her like doubt trying to be weather. The desert gave me 6 hours to be a fool. Then the sky browned at the edges, and the wind turned mean. Broom sedge laid flat. Sand took to the air like bees from a kicked hive. A haboob stalked the flats, tall as judgment. Storms out here come with a growl, not a warning. You don't wait for sense, you ride. I threw a saddle and went because a man's choice arrives fast when he's out of time. The horizon disappeared behind a wall of dust, so thick it erased the Sunday. The horse fought me every step, ears pinned, sides slick with fear. The air was grit and fire. You couldn't breathe without swallowing the land's anger. I leaned low in the saddle, eyes slitted, hat pulled down tight. Somewhere ahead was her trail, half buried already. The storm roared like the world breaking its own ribs. Mesquite branches flew past like spears. I shouted her name, but the wind tore it to shreds. Then I saw a flicker, her horse, riderless, reins dragging, wild-eyed. The beast barreled past me into the dust, and every beat of its hooves said too late. I pushed harder. The ground vanished under waves of sand, the world nothing but motion and noise. Then through the blur I caught the shape of her, small against the fury, cloak snapping like a banner. She'd dismounted and was trying to shield another horse, a young chestnut that had broken free from a nearby corral. She could have saved herself. She didn't. I slid off my saddle and fought the wind toward her. The air stung like shot. We found each other's hands by instinct. She smiled, God help me. She smiled like the storm was worth it just to prove it couldn't take everything. Stubborn woman, I yelled. Stubborn man, she yelled back, voice swallowed by the wind. We tied the horses together, huddled behind a limestone outcrop until the light turned strange and red like the inside of an eyelid. When the storm finally loosened its grip, the land looked flayed, fences down, sky scraped raw. She touched my cheek, brushed away dust, blood, maybe both. Still think peace lives without truth? She asked. I couldn't lie twice to the same woman. No, I said, not anymore. That. She looked out toward the flats, where the sun was burning its way back through the haze. Then ride home, she said softly. Before the wind forgets, we survived. We rode slow, horses stumbling through drifts of red powder. The fences would need mending, the well would be choked with grit, and half the herd would be gone. But the air smelled clean again like iron and promise. At the gate, I stopped her with a hand on the reins. The sky behind us was still bruised, but lighter at the edges. You came back once, I said. Maybe I should learn the same trick. She smiled with her eyes this time, not her mouth. Then stop standing where the wind can blow you down. By nightfall, the lamps were burning again. Mesquite Crossing could gossip all it pleased. Let it wear its judgment proud. The land doesn't keep records the way people do. It forgives in seeds and season. When she laid her head against my shoulder that night, I realized something I'd forgotten in all the years of fences and silence. The desert isn't empty. It's just waiting for a voice brave enough to echo. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from, so I don't feel so alone out here. The storm hit like a door slammed by God. Sand filled your teeth, your ears, your regrets. I worked the horse into the wind, keeping the lay of the land inside my bones, arroyos like scars, a basalt knob like an upturned knuckle. At the old cottonwood ruin by Painted Creek, I found her, scarf over her face, horse standing patient, both of them powdered the color of grief. We waited with our backs to rock until the world decided to be a world again. When the fury eased, we walked down to the creek bed. The water ran low, but the murmur of it could still climb a man's spine to the place he keeps locked. 20 years uncoiled there like rope released from a hitch. Elan put her palm on the same stone where a child once coughed life back into the night. You said stay brave, she whispered. I did, I said. Now I'm trying. She looked at me the way dawn looks at a bad night. Then try with me. I took her reins, and we headed home in that careful silence you use around newborn calves and second chances. Half a mile from the gate, 3 riders stepped out of the greasewood Hale, and 2 young bulls itching for trouble. They made a triangle with me in the middle and Elan just outside it, which told me all I needed to know about their math. Territory passed a new vagrancy ordinance, Hale said, like he'd been elected to read it. Folks of transient stock need sponsorship, paper, or they move on. I let the angle of my shoulders do some of the talking. She's under my roof. She's under my name. He tipped his hat. Your name's old, Merritt. Good, I said. It's heavier that way. His hand brushed his coat where a man keeps either a flask or a pistol. I kept my mouth short and my eyes long. You aim to test my fences, Barton. Bring wire cutters. You aim to test my word. Bring a better one. Maybe it was the wind scratching at our nerves. Maybe the creek's memory humming underfoot. But violence sniffed around our circle and decided to give us one more day. Hale spat, made a promise with his eyes the law would call polite, and they rode off. Back at the house, I set coffee to boil and my shotgun where hands could find it without theater. Elan washed grit from her hair at the rain barrel. Men like that are storms, she said. They pass, or they take something. Okay. Then we lash what's worth keeping, I said. The storm had left the land raw, as if plowed by a cruel hand. Fences down, roofs scoured to red dust, cattle milling with the lost look of creatures who trusted the sky once too often. We worked side by side mending rails, scraping mud from the troughs, sweeping grit from the doorway. Out here, work is its own prayer. Elan worked like someone who'd learned from long survival. No hurry, no waste, knowing when to stop before the living tore again. Still, the talk in town didn't stop. Morning brought gossip with the feed sacks. Merritt's keeping an Apache, the store clerk said twice before lunch. Some men spat after. Some just looked away. Others didn't look at all too polite to condemn, too weak to defend. One woman left a loaf of bread on our porch. She saved my babies, she said, eyes bright behind her shawl. She knew a medicine that worked when nothing else did. The words were whispered, but they traveled. Kindness has a way of making noise, even when spoken soft. But Hale wasn't the sort to let kindness stand. He thrived on division the way cactus thrives on drought. He fed on rumor, watered it with self-righteousness, and called it justice. That afternoon the light hit the hills like spilled whiskey. Elan was at her sewing, the needle flashing in and out of linen like a heartbeat. "Are you afraid?" she asked without looking up. I thought a while. "Afraid of losing quiet," I said. "But that kind of quiet's a locked room. I lived in it too long." I hesitated. "Maybe I'm afraid I'll fail you either by not protecting you or by driving you off because I can't stand folks seeing me as weak." She smiled faintly. "Most men think protecting means hiding away. Real protection is standing out in the open and holding your ground." Her voice softened. "The lucky ones aren't those who avoid storms, but those who know what to tie down when they come." That line hit me like gospel. I remembered that night long ago, the child clinging to my coat, the voice that asked for courage, and my own trembling answer. Promises don't always need signatures. Sometimes they're just mornings spent showing up to your own life again. That night I tightened every fence post and checked every latch. My hands ached, but my heart, God help me, felt whole for the first time in years. Elan slept early, head against my shoulder as I read from Clara's old Bible, a habit I'd never broken, maybe because it gave the silence a name. She breathed slow, steady. In that rhythm, I heard the sound of a man coming home to himself. Days rolled by. Hale sent men to inspect papers, to ask about heritage, about wages, about whether she'd been properly registered, as if a soul could be notarized. Each visit left the dust thicker on our porch, but didn't shake the beam. People started to notice. The same mothers who'd once crossed the street now stopped to share coffee. Children ran up to Elan with stories of their day. Little by little, the same town that had whispered Apache learned to say her name instead. But Hale wasn't built for retreat. One evening, just before dusk, he came up the path himself. No shouting, no swagger, just that false calm a man wears before reaching for a weapon. "I'm offering advice," he said. "Send her away, For order's sake. This town doesn't need more trouble, Merritt. I let the words hang in the air until even the flies went still. Peace bought with shame, I said quietly, isn't peace. Peace that asks a person to disappear is just fear with manners. He frowned, jaw tightening. You talk like you own this land. I do, I said. But only the part I'm willing to bleed for. He stared at me long, like he was trying to decide whether the price was worth paying. Then he turned, flicked dust off his coat, and walked away without another word. When the sound of his horse faded, Elan stepped onto the porch. The lamplight painted her face bronze and gold. You know he'll try again, she said. I know, I said, but so will we. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then we teach them something. Not with bullets. With staying. Her smile was small but sure. The kind that can outlast weather. I looked toward Painted Creek, now just a silver line under the rising moon. The wind carried the smell of wet mesquite and distant thunder. Storm's coming again, I said. Then let it, she answered. Some things don't break, they just learn to stand in the wind. I stood beside her, the air thick with dust and promise. Somewhere out there, Hale was planning his next sermon of fear, but inside these walls, something older was taking root, a kind of courage that didn't need noise to prove itself. The desert, I realized, never forgets kindness. It remembers every act like water remembers stone. And as the first drops of new rain began to fall, I understood what Ellen meant all along. Some storms don't come to destroy. They come to show you what still holds. Hey there, friend. Take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. Your body will thank you. Mesquite Crossing gathered like weather around the question of us. The town didn't speak in laws. It spoke in glances, in how long a door stayed open when we walked past. A few good men, old trail hands with sunken eyes and cracked knuckles, stood by us with nods that meant more than scripture. They were men who'd seen too much wind to believe gossip could break timber, but a few weaker ones let Hale gather them like tumbleweeds into a committee, the kind that smells of dust and fear. They met in the church basement, under a cross that had seen better prayers, and came up with a letter dressed in polite words. It wasn't law, but it sounded close enough to fool itself. For the sake of community harmony, Miss Tenaya is requested to relocate beyond town limits. Elan read it once, lips unmoving, then slipped it under the kettle leg so it'd earn its keep, keeping the pot level. The hiss of boiling water sounded like her answer. I took off my hat and laughed, once the short kind that oils a fight. Guess harmony don't travel by horse, I said. That paper's not a law, she replied. It's a confession. A confession of what? Of fear pretending to be order. Outside, the sky turned the color of brass buttons before a storm. Folks were moving around more than usual, too many errands that all led past our gate. Mesquite Crossing wasn't a big town. A whisper there could ride every porch in an hour. I knew what came next. Every settlement on this frontier had its Hale, a man who mistook leadership for ownership, faith for permission, and law for whatever made him comfortable. By Saturday, his bunch had gathered at the livery like flies on molasses. A sign hung above the corral gate. Election of decency. Sign your name for God and country. The words looked noble enough until you noticed who held the pen. Hale stood there with a rolled-up sleeve, the scar on his forearm catching light like proof of righteousness. His two boys and a preacher from Bisbee hovered close, collecting names from men too tired or too timid to refuse. I didn't plan to ride in, but a man's silence, if kept too long, turns into someone else's story. So I saddled up and rode down, dust trailing behind like a witness. They saw me coming before I spoke. Hale's mouth bent into that kind of grin that's half sermon, half sneer. Well now, he said, look what the wind blew in conscience, late to the party. I hear you're collecting signatures, I said, swinging down. But I figure my name's too heavy for your paper. He held the petition out. This is about decency, Merritt. About harmony. You used to believe in both. I still do, I said. But harmony doesn't mean all notes sound the same. A few men shifted their boots, uneasy. The preacher started to speak, then thought better. I looked around faces I'd known 20 years, men I'd sweated beside on drives, traded horses with, buried brothers alongside. I saw shame in their eyes, and shame's an honest thing. It means the good part of a man ain't dead yet. A man's house is his oath, I told them, and a man's oath is older than your ink. Hale stepped forward, shoulder first, the way a steer tests a fence post. You think you're special, Merritt? You think that woman makes you right? I think she makes me honest, I said. He laughed once, low and mean. You've forgotten your place. I looked him in the eye. You ever wonder why fences stand, Barton? Not 'cause wood's strong, but 'cause something inside it remembers straight. Hands moved. Words lost their job. The preacher stumbled back. The air filled with dust and the smell of men proving what they should have said with words. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't the kind of fight that makes songs. It was knuckles and boots and splinters. The livery door banged open. Hale swung wild, caught my jaw. I hit back, hard enough to remind him gravity had jurisdiction too. A barrel cracked against a post. Someone yelled my name. Someone else cursed God. I felt knuckles split, heard bone give like green wood bending past its will. The world narrowed to the sound of fists and breath, the old language of men who've run out of better ones. When it ended, Hale lay in the straw, bleeding from the mouth, eyes glassy with confusion rather than repentance. The preacher held his cross sideways, like he couldn't decide if it was a weapon or a prayer. The rest just stood there, sweating righteousness. Then the sheriff came, a decent man with a decent limp. He fired once into the sky. The echo rolled through town like a sermon that didn't need words. Enough, he barked. You boys want to fight. Take it out where the sand don't stain. That. He looked from Hale to me, then to the bruised faces of half a dozen men who should have known better. This town's too small for cowards to stay comfortable, he said finally. Maybe that's a good thing. Hale staggered to his feet, pride holding him up better than his bones. You think this is over, he hissed. I wiped blood from my eye. I hope not, I said. I still owe you one prayer. The sheriff gave me a look that said half warning, half respect, then turned the others out of the livery. He didn't arrest anyone. The desert has its own way of keeping record. That night, the house smelled of lamp oil and iodine. Elan sat me under the light, her shadow falling across my chest. You've made your point, she said softly. Did I? Only to the ones who wanted to hear it. She threaded a needle, the kind of quiet concentration that could mend more than flesh. Hold still. Live. The first prick stung. I winced, and she smiled without humor. Pain has its own prayer, she said. Yours seems to say stay. Maybe that's all a man's prayer ever says when you strip it down. She tied the stitch and leaned close to blow out the lamp smoke. Her breath smelled faintly of coffee and juniper. You can't fight every wind, Cole. No, I said. Just the ones that try to move what's rooted. Len. She looked at me then not as savior or scandal, but as a man too stubborn to fall twice the same way. The lamplight found the scar along her wrist, pale as lightning. She caught me looking and said, Every mark's a map. Some lead you home. Outside, Mesquite Crossing was quieter than I'd ever heard it. The wind had died, but you could still feel it circling somewhere out there, waiting for someone to flinch. From the porch, I saw lanterns flicker in the distance, neighbors pretending they weren't watching. Maybe tomorrow they'd talk again. Maybe they'd side with whoever shouted loudest. But for tonight, the town breathed like a body too tired for hate. I stepped back inside. Elan poured water from the kettle into a basin, washed the blood from my knuckles with the care of someone cleaning something holy. They'll come again, I said. I know, she replied, and we'll still be here. Lay. She bound my hand, and for a long moment the only sound was the tick of cooling metal. Then, quieter. Why do you stay, Cole? Why not sell out, ride east, forget this place? I thought about it, about the war, the graves, the years lost building fences around ghosts. Because if a man keeps running from his past, I said, he just teaches it to run faster. I'd rather let it find me standing. She nodded, eyes warm and fierce. Then we stand together, of lose. Outside, coyotes began to sing, their voices threading through the mesquite like sorrow and promise braided into one. I sat beside her, feeling the sting fade from my brow, and realized that for all Hale's talk of decency, it was here inside this small, battered house that the frontier's better angels still found work to do. At dawn, I rode out to check the fences again. The desert smelled of iron and renewal. A strip of blue was climbing the horizon, thin as mercy. The post where I'd driven my fist in anger was cracked clean through. I left it that way, a reminder that strength isn't what holds, but what bends and still stands. When I turned back toward the house, Elan was already outside, hair loose in the wind, sleeves rolled, feeding the chickens. The light touched her like she belonged to the land, not borrowed from it. For the first time in a long while, I felt something simple as truth. The world doesn't change by decree, it changes by staying. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. Dawn the next day came on slow, like a man learning to trust his own step. The world wasn't ready to be bright yet. It had to think about it first. The mesas were still wrapped in gray shawls, and the air smelled of damp ash and horse sweat, the scent of things that had survived. I saddled the roan and led him to the porch. Ellen stood there with a blanket she'd been weaving for weeks, quiet work done between storms and gossip. The pattern was of river and star, stitched into the same lane of sky, a kind of map that didn't need north. She set it across my shoulders without ceremony. The wool was coarse, warm, and human. Some sacraments don't need witnesses, only weather and the will to stay. We rode the fence line in easy silence. Every post leaned a different way after the storm, like men who'd argued with the wind and lost by degrees. We straightened what we could, mended wire where it had sagged, left alone the places the land clearly meant to change. A man doesn't fight the desert. He learns the language of its patience. At Painted Creek, the old cottonwood ruin still stood half ghost, half sermon. Its roots gripped stone the way old love grips memory, not for beauty, but because letting go never made sense. The water whispered through its stones, thin but certain. Elan dismounted first, walked to the edge, and took my hand. "Here," she said, "where it began." The morning light lay pale across her hair. The creek murmured something older than prayer. And there, simple and clean, we set our vows where water remembers. No preacher, no choir, no paper to sign or law to bless it. Just the creek saying do right in a tongue older than English, and the sky leaning close to hear. She said, "I'll stay till the land forgets our names, or learns to say them kind." "That's Ruthie." I said, "I'll keep the fences, but not between us." It wasn't much of a ceremony, but the world took notice anyway. A hawk rose from the cottonwood stump. The horse snorted once, as if to seal the thing. When we rode back, I swear the wind itself had changed direction, carrying our dust toward tomorrow instead of away. Back in town, the talk had turned softer, some of it because fear got bored, some because children healed after Elan's tonics, and one foreman's wife finally slept through a pain Elan knew how to name. That's how peace spreads in a place like this, not in sermons or proclamations, but through a woman's hands and a man's word kept steady. As for Hale, he kept his distance. Pride heals slower than bone. He took to fussing with his boundary maps like a gambler rearranging luck, redrawing lines on paper no one cared about. His house grew quieter, his circle smaller. Sometimes he tipped his hat from across the street, never apology, but maybe fatigue pretending to be civility. Time is a slow judge, but a good one. We didn't win a fairy tale. Fairy tales are for places with soft weather and easy endings. What we won was smaller, tougher, truer. We won mornings with coffee and the smell of saddle soap, evenings where stars came on like good dogs, one by one, faithful and quiet. Elan filled the house with movement-grinding herbs, humming low songs that bent around the walls. I patched saddles and fixed tools, the kind of work that doesn't get noticed unless it's not done. The days gathered around us like fence posts set in good ground. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, we'd ride out toward the rim where the world drops off into sky. There, she'd talk about her grandmother, the woman who taught her that every route has two stories, one that holds and one that searches. "People forget," she said once, looking out over the vastness, "that freedom isn't about distance, it's about depth." I thought on that a long while. I'd spent half my life riding away from ghosts, thinking each mile bought me more air to breathe. But freedom, I learned, isn't riding away. It's riding with, side by side, reins loose, eyes open. The roan learned to trust her voice before it trusted mine. So did I. There were still days of hardship, droughts, sick calves, and the unending arithmetic of survival. But even hard days had their grace. The kettle always had something hot in it. The floor always had a place for tired boots. When the storms came, we lashed what was worth keeping and let the rest blow where it would. One night near midwinter, snow came down light as breath. We sat by the stove, fire whispering against the iron. Elan took the blanket from the hook and spread it across both our knees, river and star, same sky. "You see," she said, "the patterns never end. They just move slower." Outside, Mesquite Crossing slept. The saloon piano was quiet, the church lamp dim. Somewhere down the road, a coyote called, and another answered. Between those two notes, I realized the land had accepted us. Not as heroes, not as sinners, just as part of its weather. Months passed. Spring found a way back through cracked soil. The cottonwood at Painted Creek sprouted a single new limb, green as forgiveness. People started calling the place Brave Water. I never asked who coined it, but I reckon the land approved. Hale sold his ranch to a younger man from Tucson. He left one dawn without ceremony, his wagon loaded with maps that never matched the truth of the ground. He didn't look back. Some men don't know how. The sheriff came by once, long after the dust settled. "Town's quieter now," he said. "Guess even rumors get tired." He looked at me, then at Elan hanging wash in the yard. "Funny thing about peace," he said. "It never looks the same twice." When he rode off, Elan called after him, "Tell the wind we're staying." He waved, not turning. We built a porch that summer wide enough for 2 chairs and a sky full of stories. On Sundays we'd sit there, her spinning yarn, me oiling leather. Sometimes she'd hum, and I'd keep time by tapping a boot heel on the rail. Other times, we just listened to the grass, the creek, the kind of silence that means work well done. I learned more in those months than in the 20 years before. That kindness can outlast law, that love doesn't demand applause, and that the world doesn't always punish hope, it just asks you to prove it. Now and then, travelers came through, railmen, drifters, widows chasing letters that never arrived. They'd stop for water, trade stories, and leave lighter than they came. A few mentioned hearing about the ranch where the Apache healer lives, with the fenceman who fought a storm. I never corrected them. Let legends do their work. The truth's quieter, but it gets there all the same. Evening after evening, we'd watch the sun crawl down behind the mesa, the light turning everything copper. I used to think love was a trumpet, a sudden, blinding call that changed everything. But it came to me more like a hand steadying a skittish horse. Patient, quiet, sure. Some nights, I'd find her at the window, looking out toward the dark horizon. "What are you seeing?" I'd ask. "Tomorrow," she'd say. "It's always starting somewhere. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't a story about winning or losing. It's about staying, about the grit it takes to build peace from the same dust that once tried to bury you. So if you're still listening, I reckon you're one of the true ones, the kind who stays through the storm to see what grows after." From the bottom of my heart, I wish your days got some quiet in it, some coffee that don't run bitter, and maybe a small streak of luck finding you in the next 15 minutes. And if you're wondering what to call this, don't call it a miracle. Call it one of those cowboy love stories that refuses to die. A small Wild West love that keeps a porch warm. A story that ties a man to his better self and leaves the knot where everyone can see it, shining in the sun like something honest earned the hard way. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment AMEN below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life.